just finished my book. It's a YA paranormal romance about these immortal, glamorous beings who live in New York City.
That sounds perfect. Vampires are all the rage.
No, they're not vampires. They're just immortal beings who rely on sucking life out of other people to survive.
Exactly, vampires.
But
you seen how successful that Twilight book from last year was?
yeah.
Exactly. So, tell me more about the vampires.
Right. What with Halloween only just disappeared around the corner, I figured it was still acceptable to read, well,
a scary book.
But that book, it transpired, was too scary, so I didn't finish it in time. Instead, I'll be looking at this. Blue Bloods by Melissa de la Cruz is a paranormal romance from that distant past, 2006. It is about the Blue Bloods, the glamorous elite of New York, young, rich and entitled. They spend their time buying designer clothes, playing lacrosse and drinking blood. That's right, it's set at one of those pretentious schools where they still play lacrosse. Oh yeah, and they're vampires too. As you've probably realised, this is one of those Twilight knockoffs. But not just any knockoff. This is the creme de la creme of Twilight knockoffs. We have the bland main character who doesn't fit in with the popular crowd. She is, however, noticed by the elusive hot guy at school, who travels around with other hot people. She also has a childhood friend who is in love with her. The hot guy and the hot people he travels around with turn out to be vampires. She and the hot guy start a hot and cold relationship. He kisses her one moment, then pushes her away the next. The childhood friend turns out also to be special. There are other vampires who are evil and must be stopped. Anyway, back to this book. It mostly follows three main characters. Mimi Force, the queen bee who cares more about feeling good and looking good than actually being good. Bliss Llewellyn, who recently moved to New York from Texas, where she was the most popular girl in school, but now relies on Mimi's fame to get by. And Skylar Van Halen. Not that Van Halen, sadly. Who is ostracised by her classmates for her offbeat sense of fashion. But something is amiss. A vampire is found murdered, which, considering vampires are generally unkillable, really, sucks. Skylar and Bliss are particularly intent on tracking down who or what did this, along with Skylar's best friend Oliver and Mimi's brother, the hot vampire Jack Force. But the vampire elders are clearly hiding something. Could it be connected with the deaths? Or are there other secrets lurking in the sordid depths beneath the glitterati Nosferatu? The glitteratu. To be honest, I really struggled to put together a sort of what this book is about, because nothing really happens for ages. The plot starts, and then it stops because the only character who does anything is Skylar, and she doesn't do anything until she realises she's a vampire, or blue blood, but that doesn't happen until halfway through. So half of this book is faffing, and the second half is slightly more focused faffing, but only slightly. As you can tell, I did not rate this book. By the way, there are so many spoilers in this. The opening is half decent. I liked the excerpt from The Historian and the introduction to a nightclub called The Bank in the opening chapter. There were some good ideas in this book as well. The fact that the vampires disguise themselves as the New York Blood Bank Committee is pretty funny. I also really liked that Caligula, the mad Roman emperor, was actually an insane Silverblood, which is a vampire.
Your Highness! Your Highness!
I kind of love how extra everything is. There's a moment where Bliss is throwing a house party because her parents are out of town, but is worried about the flat, so Mimi just has all of her furniture shipped to Jersey for the night. It's stupid, but my sort of stupid. I thought having the interspersed diary sections was nice. Every now and again, between chapters, we get an excerpt from Catherine Canver's diary in 1620, after she had travelled to Plymouth. No, not that one. On the Mayflower. My only complaint was that the font was quite difficult to read. New World problems. Am I right? And on the whole, there's a general feeling that De La Cruz tried, sort of. I don't think it was successful in the slightest, but she had attempted some world building and some intrigue and some original ideas. It's not done well and definitely needed more, but, you know, she tried. So many issues. Firstly, the characters, they were all rubbish. At best, they were cliches. At worst, they were just empty shells of nothingness. Mimi is probably the best character here in terms of having some semblance of a personality. Don't get me wrong, it's not an interesting character. She's basically Regina George, but in a bad way and less funny. Bliss is nearly good. She has this struggle between being a nice person and being Mimi's underling to regain some modicum of popularity, but it's woefully wasted. Jack Force, the hot vampire Skylar is thirsty for, is... yep, Diet Edward Cullen. I actually cannot say anything else about him. Oliver, Skylar's best friend, is... all I remember is that I found him really possessive and creepy. He's in love with Skylar, obviously. She's very beautiful after all. They're not dating, but he acts really funny when Skylar talks to Jack in the first chapter, calling her babe and that, and marking her as his possession. And when she dances with Jack at the homecoming dance, whatever this pretentious school calls it, he literally refuses to talk to her afterwards. And he's generally quite inconsistent. When Skylar joins the vampire committee, Oliver is all surprised and upset and quite nasty. But later on, when he's revealed to be a conduit, he says he knew all along, so what was with the hysterics? Skylar really is the worst character though. She is a Mary Sue on the most basic level. Incredibly beautiful, but quirky and misunderstood. She's not just a vampire, but a special vampire. She has the best magical abilities, the best dog familiar. All the hot guys want her. She's the chosen one. And, like all Sues, underneath all of that, she is a big bag of nothing. It's like eating candy floss. Lots of promise, kind of, in the bright food dye, but when you look closer, there's just nothing. It's not even good candy floss, it tastes like cardboard. Just bland nothingness. On the surface, she's incredibly beautiful, and I cannot emphasise enough how beautiful she is. But dresses like an old bag lady in all her layers of t-shirts over turtlenecks, over skirts, that she bought from charity shops instead of high-end boutiques. And she's so quiet and shy, except she never acts quiet or shy. She's too busy being beautiful to actually have a personality. She's not like other girls because she likes 50 Cent instead of Eminem and wears a 50s dress to the dance, and all the other girls laugh at her, which really embarrasses her, even though she literally dresses as a bag lady at school and doesn't care. Basically, the only consistent thing about her is her beauty. I have heard people speak of book characters that are essentially beautiful and nothing else.
What else is there?
But I'd never actually found one. I couldn't believe it when I read this. It was like a really bad self-insert Mary Sue in a fan fiction, but this is a real published book. The narration waxes lyrical about her beauty several times, as does Bliss, who is also objectively beautiful because she's a vampire. Skylar is so beautiful that someone from a model agency sees her in an oversized granny dress and ladder tights and unwashed hair and has to sign her up. But Skylar's obviously too good to officially be a model, but she does let the woman take her photo and number, and obviously she gets a job almost immediately. Never any financial discussion though, which is odd considering Skylar is very little money. Bit sus. What I'm saying is that Skylar does not have an actual personality or character. She has stuff put on her, like the stupid clothes and the being beautiful and the powers and the chosen one status and the dog and all that, but no actual personality. I couldn't tell you what she's like or her hobbies. It was as if Cruz came up with her and went, well, my main character dresses as a bag lady and is incredibly beautiful.
What else is there?
The minor characters are no better. Skylar's grandma Cordelia is every other frosty old woman. Dylan, who's Skylar and Oliver's friend, is an edgelord who dresses like an English punk rocker. Charles Force, who's Jack and Mimi's dad, is your generic, intimidating man in power. It's just dull. As this is a Twilight clone, there is also romance, and by romance I mean a love triangle, which is rubbish and difficult to root for because Oliver is a creep, Skylar has no personality, and Jack is so hot and cold, but not in a good way. Not that there is a good way in my opinion, but hey-ho. We all know that Jack is one Skylar will end up with because he's Diet Edward Cullen, and Skylar is Bella Swan Light. Romeo and Juliet, it is not. Which is a shame because if it was, they would both be dead at the end, and the book would be better for it. Are you even a vampire if you're not undead? There is no good reason why anyone likes anyone in this. Oliver is just in love with Skylar. Skylar fancies Jack because he notices her, and Jack notices Skylar because she looks like her comatose mother, who Jack was in love with for several past lives. The only actual reason they like each other specifically, I guess, is because they're all incredibly beautiful. Which, as we know, is the only important thing in romance. There is also a romance between Bliss and Dylan, Skylar's friend. They just sort of start dating over their shared love of destroying their lungs. That's all you need to know, I guess. Any romance is killed, however, when Dylan is revealed to be a vampire and Bliss is all, "That's why I was so drawn to him." So she didn't like or love him because of anything substantial like shared interests or humour or being too beautiful for this world, but because he's a vampire too. Remember, kids, the only way to find true love is to stick to your own kind. The writing is kind of pants. It's easy to read, but not exactly pleasant. The way it's put together is very clumsy and aimless. One sort of gets the impression that the author wrote it in one sitting and then didn't bother rereading it. There are so many pointless scenes where absolutely nothing happened. The author's also very bad at explaining things. There are so many elements of this world that don't really make sense, which I'll get to in more detail, don't worry. But the whole thing feels inconsistent because it's explained, but then the action doesn't match the explanation, or key parts are missed out of the explanation, so it feels a bit unfair, like a rug pull. There's a section where Bliss has a nightmare about a struggle. She realises the nightmare was real and had literally just happened. She's just been attacked by a silverblood, a vampire.
Your Highness, Your Highness.
And Dylan has been spirited away. But then she woke up in bed and immediately forgot this had happened until a few minutes after she woke up. What? Like, I get the tension, the dramatic tension that Cruz is trying to create, but that's not how you do it. There are also moments where I think the author either lost her mind or just forgot how to word. Like this on page 120. Cool. Mimi drew out the word so it had 10 syllables. What the hell is going on with you? You're with that guy? You could be with any guy you want. I like him. He's cool. Are you okay? Are you having a stroke? There was also an incorrect comma and defiantly being used to describe dialogue twice in 3 lines. This book does my least favourite thing of head hopping, but somehow worse. I don't like head hopping at the best of times, as we know, but this really is a masterclass in why it just doesn't work unless you're being really careful. This has a very informal writing style, which is fine. Informal writing can imply strong character voice, but when you head hop and the style doesn't change, you imply all the characters have the same voice, which obviously is not good. This book has an unhealthy obsession with describing clothes in that very clumsy, fanfiction-y way of stopping the action to deliver a paragraph about the characters' outfits. And not only that, but it frequently name drops fashion brands. I am not joking, there are more than 50 fashion designers and labels used in the description, and that's not counting the repetitions. Every time someone's outfit is described, it's Chanel this or Versace that, Jack Purcell shoes and heady Slimane dresses, and I don't care. I wouldn't even mind if it was just Mimi's sections that do this, because she's quite fashion conscious, but Skylar does it too. Skylar, who dresses in dirty second-hand rags she hasn't even bothered to chuck in the washing machine. It's just a mess. The descriptions are pretty dull too, very juvenile and samey because everyone's white and blonde and skinny and incredibly beautiful, and you know, this constant description of what clothes people are wearing and how beautiful every damn character is, well, it kind of reminds me of something. The next day I woke up in my bedroom. It was snowing and raining again. I opened the door of my coffin and drank some blood from a bottle I had. My coffin was black ebony, and inside it was hot pink velvet with black lace on the ends. I got out of my coffin and took off my giant MCR t-shirt, which I used for pyjamas. Instead I put on a black leather dress, a pentagram necklace, combat boots and black fishnets on. I put on 4 pairs of earrings in my pierced ears and put my hair in a kind of messy bun. My friend Willow woke up then and grinned at me. She flipped her long, waist-length raven black hair with pink streaks and opened to her forest green eyes. She put on her Marilyn Manson t-shirt with a black mini, fishnets and pointy high-heeled boots. We put on our makeup, black lipstick, white foundation and black eyeliner. The plot is just... I've already said how basically nothing happens. It's just faffing. Faffing and fashion with the occasional essay about how beautiful the characters are. I guess this is why we have the pointless subplots like Skylar becoming a fashion model, this is really frustrating because it should have been more interesting. You have freaking vampires, and we barely get any vampire stuff. Bliss is plagued with these nightmares and flashes of memories from her past lives, and we get very little specific detail. Just that she has nightmares. That's all you need to know. Let's go see Mimi go shopping. Literally, there is a scene of Mimi buying designer clothes, and that's it. I guess the main plot is the mysterious death of Aggie, a blue blood who is discovered murdered after chapter 2. But no one really does anything. Mimi is in denial, Bliss accepts the drug overdose story, and Skylar doesn't care. Only Jack cares, but he's not a POV character, so psh. The best we get is Jack telling Skylar Aggie was murdered, but even then there's no real relationship between these two characters, so it's very forced and random, and Skylar still doesn't really care to do anything. She just doesn't really care at all until she becomes a vampire halfway through, and then they make very little headway very slowly. Jack remembers a snippet of memory, the word Croatan during his 17th century life in Plymouth. No, not that one. Which they eventually link to the Roanoke colony. Cordelia finally tells Skylar about the Silverbloods, the vampires,
Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness.
who decide to join with Lucifer and drink vampire blood instead of people. Oh yeah, vampires in this are fallen angels. They find out that there's a silver blood fully consuming blue bloods, and Jack's dad sorts it out, more or less. It gets unsorted out, but then the problem nopes out of the book until the sequel, so all our main characters achieved nothing.
You lose! Good day, sir!
It's a weird plot in that it doesn't really make any sense why it's only our main characters, who are all teenagers by the way, like 15 or 16, trying to solve anything. The elders don't want to get involved because I don't really know. They don't believe the Silverbloods are real because the higher-ups wiped their memories of them, but I don't know why they did that. Apparently it's because of pride, but I don't know, it feels like a very weak and very forced explanation. Eventually we get to a climax of this sort of plot. It transpires that this Silverblood was Dylan. Not to brag, but I worked it out within a few chapters, which never happens, so maybe not the best mystery. Except it's not totally Dylan because he was possessed by a Silverblood, which apparently they can do. I suppose the author thought this was a great twist because of all the hints she dropped about it being Charles' fault instead of Dylan, including one about Skylar seeing Charles at the scene of the crime, but not telling us until they were on their way to confront him. I actually went back to the chapter where she was supposed to have seen him. It's not mentioned. Just all of a sudden she remembered seeing him. A bit like a Poirot film ending with Poirot being all, "It was so-and-so. How do I know? Why, I saw him do it. I just forgot about it until now." The world building is just whatever random nonsense De La Cruz came up with whilst binging on cactus juice. And most of it is in the induction into the New York Blood Bank Committee, or Vampire Committee. There's this whole thing about the vampire myth and how it was made up by a section of the committee to throw people off the scent, but it's sort of confusing. And it sounds like the author only knew vague bits about the vampire myth, but instead of researching it, just made up her own explanations for everything. So vampires having an aversion to garlic and sunlight and crucifixes isn't a thing. It's made up to confuse people. Fine idea. But then they say that there are real reasons that vampires don't like these things, but clearly don't not like these things because they still be having beach holidays and assemblies and chapels and fancy food probably stuffed with garlic. The reasons are really weak. They don't like crucifixes or sunlight because it reminds them of paradise. What with them being fallen angels and all that. Not that they ever act particularly religious. And garlic. They don't like it because it smells, which doesn't fit in with their aesthetic. They all smoke though, which you'd think would be bad for the same reason, but yeah. The whole Dracula thing is apparently a conspiracy made up by a Hungarian blue blood, which is objectively stupid because it was the Irish writer Bram Stoker who made the connection between Vlad the Impaler and vampires in 1897. It would have made more sense if Stoker was the blue blood, especially as so many of the conspiracies are in Dracula, but what do I know? There's also a bit of confusion with when the vampires first reached America. It says that the blue bloods, as a collective I suppose, fled Europe on the Mayflower in 1620. Elsewhere, it says that the lost colony of Roanoke were also vampires, but they went missing, historically, in the 1580s, 30 years before vampires reached America. And I'll get back to this. The way that vampires' life cycles work are a bit confusing. There are no new vampires. After their body dies, they are reborn in a different body, or the same body, eventually. After being born or reborn, they start to turn from human to vampire when they're about 15 or so. Then they regain all their memories from their previous lives. Fine. The body tends to last for about 100 years unless you get permission to live longer. Then you die, and so because vampires can't reproduce, they just recycle previous vampires. You don't get pregnant. This is how one of the characters describes it. We cannot create new life. We merely carry the spirits of those who have passed in a new embryonic form through in vitro fertilization. Our women are implanted with the seed of an immortal consciousness so that it can take on a new physical shell in the cycle of expression. The seed of immortal consciousness, huh? Does that come as an injection or a suppository? It's also implied that twins get married in vampire communities. I did not like this detail. Also, if vampires just give birth to previous vampires and they all seem to look the same in flashbacks, that implies that they have looked the way they do since their earthly beginnings in Egypt. But they're all white blonde people. So they must have chosen how they looked when they came to live in ancient Egypt, where there were not exactly many white blonde people. My conclusion? These vampires are racist. The silver blood thing is just as confusing too. I imagine them being like the Hollows from Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, a vampire that was corrupted by drinking vampire blood. A vampire.
Let's just leave that for now, shall we?
I thought it strange that the silver bloods could hide amongst the blue bloods, because surely if they all recognise each other from their previous lives, you'd remember who was eating the other blue bloods. Then I thought, maybe you can't tell. It's sneaky, like a werewolf in a village. Could be anyone. Then, out of nowhere, it's possession. Like the silver bloods don't have their own body anymore, or it's a spirit that possesses blue bloods to turn them into silver bloods, but the silver bloods are so cool because their blood turns silver, so shouldn't they still have a physical body? It's really bad explained, and I don't understand it. I'm sure it makes sense in De La Cruz's head, but she didn't communicate it very well on the page. Perhaps it got lost amongst all those fashion labels. The last big thing I'm going to talk about is the Roanoke issue. You may have heard of Roanoke as being a great American unsolved-ish mystery. The lost colony of Roanoke was a group of English settlers who went missing between 1587 and 1590. The only clue left behind was the word Croatoan on a tree. In the last few years, more evidence has come to surface to the point where I think most people are satisfied with the explanation that they sold it off to join the Croatan tribe. But before these last bits of evidence, no one was 100% sure, apart from the Native Americans who said, hey, this is what happened, but who listens to them, right? Anyway, it's a famous mystery, so when it was mentioned in this book with characters going, hey, what's Roanoke, what's Croatan? I figured, in this world, it isn't an unsolved mystery, until they finally found mentions of it in ancient manuscripts in a library, and went, oh yeah, I remember this famous mystery now. That won't ridicule them for not remembering, because, hey, my memory's pretty pants. But this was written, and as far as I can tell, set in 2006. You have access to Google, guys! Seriously, did none of you think to hop on a computer and chuck it into a search engine? You would have found it immediately. Maybe not the stuff about the vampires, but they would have found the answers they wanted more quickly. I mean, for goodness sake, even Bella Swan thought to Bing search vampire symptoms in Twilight. These characters are officially, collectively dumber than Bella Swan. I've already talked about the timing issue of Roanoke being vampires because Roanoke happened 30 years before the vampires reached America. One could argue that vampires settled on Roanoke after the original colony went missing, but no, because Croatoan or Croatan has been mixed in with this lore. And Croatan, again, written on this tree 30 years before the vampires reached America. And I do take issue with Croatan being used here. So the old tongue in this book is basically a collection of words the author nicked from other languages rather than make up her own. For example, vampire means fire angel. There are various Latin phrases which were very interestingly translated. And Croatan in this means abomination, which refers now to the evil Silverbloods. Firstly, it would have made more sense to just make up some words, or maybe use something more akin to ancient Egyptian tongue, as that's where they first settled, or Hebrew, seeing as they're fallen angels. Secondly, Croatan were a real Native American tribe. You can't just steal their name, expunge them from history, and turn them into evil vampires in league with the devil. Again, I'm not really one to get a bee in my bonnet about sensitivity issues, but when all the good blue bloods are blonde white people and the evil silver bloods are called Croatan, I have to raise an eyebrow. And now for the list of random stuff that annoyed me. Context, not guaranteed. Why was there a random Italian dude in the private dressing room? Does he often go in there spying on underage girls? And where did the shopping assistant go? Who wears a navy blazer with khaki trousers and a red tie? Why does this book feel so pro-old money and anti-new money? Bliss wakes up at 11:49, goes downstairs to snack on her weirdly bloody minced beef, then her stepmother catches her at 3 a.m. What was she doing for 3 hours? Snooze in the back pews, which was a lot more comfortable than nodding off in class. Someone's clearly never sat in a pew before. This school has an auditorium that seats 200 people, but they use the chapel for assemblies? I get the school building is an old manor house, so yeah, it'd have a chapel, but not that big. I'm sorry, but a sweaty dance to Muse's Time Is Running Out is not my idea of romantic. There is a British stylist at the modelling shoot. She's Cockney, calls Skylar Love, and her name is Patience Smith. Skylar and Jack's first kiss goes straight into Frenching. The way it's worded implies the tongues touch at the same time as the lips, so were they leaning towards each other with their tongues sticking out? Maybe that's how Frenching works, I don't freaking know. Is a doorman trying to sell a $5 million apartment to 3 teenagers? We've been acting as if the system works for us. It doesn't. You need to think like blue bloods. This book has made it very clear that blue bloods practically control the city with how much power and money they collectively have. You are the system! Skylar tries to tell Jack about the silver blood stuff she learnt from Cordelia, even though he's made it clear he doesn't want to know her. Before, she tells her friends actively trying to help her.
She needs to sort out her priorities.
Skylar drinks at Starbucks. But that's where basic people go! And she is not like other girls! I feel betrayed. She whispered the rest in Skylar's ear. Are you hiding this from the audience? Like a children's cartoon? Why does Jack force throw himself under attacks in the opening? For fun? How does the not dying work exactly? Is it like Deadpool or Wolverine where it's just accelerated healing? Or like a checkpoint in a computer game? Or also he gets pulled under the taxi but the driver doesn't notice? Also his name is Jack Force. Actually his name's Ben but is Jack because he's special.
That's really stupid.
I would not bother with this. It's maybe not as dated as some books from this era, but it still reeks of that Twilight clone, and the few interesting ideas it had were sadly crushed by the convoluted writing and bad execution. The romance isn't good enough as a guilty pleasure, and the only fun that can be derived is the weird vampire angel stuff, but even then, it wasn't so outlandish as to be hilarious, just kind of stupid. This one is a hard pass. I'm hoping that by next time I'll have finished the original scary book and have some sort of review written before I can banish it back to the void from whence it came. Until then, goodbye.